Hey guys, tonight we're going to pull back the velvet curtains on one of the most idealized civilizations in history, ancient Rome. We often picture toga-clad senators, grand aqueducts, and epic battles. But beneath that polished marble facade, within the very heart of the Roman home, lay some truly disturbing realities about family life. We're talking about power dynamics that would make your jaw drop, and a level of control that, frankly, you probably wouldn't survive for 5 minutes in. It's a side of Rome that's far less glamorous and much more unsettling. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're listening, drop a comment with your location and what time it is there. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find yourself in a Roman household around 100 CE, standing in the atrium of a respectable, though not obscenely wealthy, family. Sunlight streams through the open roof, illuminating a small impluvium collecting rainwater. The air is thick with the scent of wood smoke, old parchment, and the lingering aroma of morning bread. As you observe the household, a figure enters who commands immediate absolute attention. The Paterfamilias, the father of the family. He is not just the head of the household, he is its undisputed king, its judge, its priest, and often its executioner. This is where the truly disturbing part begins: the concept of patria potestas, or fatherly power. This wasn't just a patriarchal system in the modern sense of a dominant male figure. This was a legal and social construct that granted the paterfamilias absolute, lifelong authority over every single member of his household. And when we say every single member, we mean it: his wife, his legitimate children, no matter their age or achievements, his grandchildren born through his sons, and all enslaved individuals living under his roof. Imagine being a grown man, a decorated legionary, or a respected senator. Yet legally you were still a child in the eyes of your father, unable to own property, enter contracts, or even marry without his consent. It's a power dynamic that feels utterly alien to our modern sensibilities. This power wasn't merely symbolic. It was enshrined in Roman law and custom. The paterfamilias held the power of life and death, ius vitae nescisque, over his children, particularly his newborn offspring. While the direct killing of adult children became rare in later periods, the legal right technically remained. More commonly, if a child displeased him or brought shame upon the family, the father could banish them, disinherit them, or force them into servitude. This was a terrifying, unchecked authority, a power that made every interaction with the head of the family a delicate dance of respect and trepidation. Consider the moment a child was born. The infant would be placed at the father's feet. It was the paterfamilias' decision alone whether to raise the child or not. If he picked the child up, acknowledging it as his own, it was accepted into the family. If he left it on the ground, or explicitly ordered it to be exposed, left out to die, his decision was legally binding, and there was nothing the mother or anyone else could do. This practice, known as infanticide through exposure, was a grim reality, particularly for female infants or those with perceived deformities. It's a dark stain on the otherwise romanticized image of Roman family values. Even marriage offered little escape. A daughter marrying typically transitioned from her father's potestas to her husband's, though later forms of marriage allowed her to remain legally under her father's authority while living with her husband. For sons, even if they were celebrated generals returning from victorious campaigns, they remained legally subordinate to their paterfamilias until his death. All property acquired by a son, including military plunder or senatorial salaries, legally belonged to the father. This meant that a son could achieve immense public success and fame, but still be financially dependent on his elderly father. Historians still debate the practical application and frequency of the ius vitae nescisque over adult children. Though its symbolic power was undeniable, this constant state of subordination created complex, often tense, family dynamics. While affection certainly existed, it was always tempered by this immense power imbalance. Sons might outwardly defer to their fathers while secretly chafing under their control, eagerly awaiting their father's demise to finally achieve legal and financial independence. Daughters were pawns in familial alliances, married off to consolidate power or wealth, with little to no say in their own destinies. The Paterfamilias was also the family's chief priest, responsible for maintaining the family cult, honoring the household gods Lares and Penates, and performing daily rituals. He was the moral arbiter, dictating behavior and enforcing discipline. His decisions were law within his own walls, and there was no appeal. Imagine living in a home where one person's word was absolute, unchallengeable truth, a constant weight pressing down on every action and decision. Even the enslaved individuals in the household fell under the paterfamilias' immense power. He could buy, sell, punish, or even kill enslaved people with legal impunity. While Roman law did eventually introduce some protections for enslaved individuals against extreme cruelty, their lives were entirely at the mercy of their master's will. This pervasive presence of absolute power over human lives, even within the supposed intimacy of the home, is one of the most disturbing aspects of Roman family life. So, as you observe this Roman household, remember that the smiling faces and grand pronouncements often masked a deep-seated reality of absolute control. The paterfamilias was the linchpin, the ultimate authority, and his power shaped every aspect of life within his domain, for better or for worse. It's a reminder that beneath the veneer of Roman civilization lay a family structure built on a foundation of power that we, in our modern world, would find profoundly unsettling, perhaps even tyrannical. It makes your own family squabbles seem rather tame, doesn't it? You've grappled with the formidable power of the paterfamilias. Now, let's turn to the most vulnerable members of the Roman family, its youngest. For all the Roman emphasis on lineage and legacy, the reality of childhood's precarious start was incredibly brutal, marked by shockingly high infant mortality rates and the grim, legally sanctioned practice of infanticide. Imagine a Roman mother having just endured a difficult childbirth in a dimly lit room of her home. Her labor is fraught with danger for both her and the baby. Midwives, if available, offer what limited assistance they can, often relying on traditional remedies and superstitious practices. There are no modern medical interventions, no sterile environments, no antibiotics. Puerperal fever, infections, and complications during delivery are constant, terrifying threats. For many Roman women, childbirth was one of the most perilous moments of their lives, and infant survival was far from guaranteed. Even if the mother and child survived the birth, the first few days and weeks of life were a gauntlet. Infant mortality in ancient Rome was staggeringly high. Estimates vary, but it's believed that as many as 30 to 50% of all Roman children died before their first birthday, and a significant number more before reaching adulthood. Diseases like dysentery, smallpox, measles, and respiratory infections swept through crowded urban centers, claiming the lives of countless infants and young children. Poor sanitation, contaminated water, and a lack of understanding about germ theory made every childhood illness a life-or-death struggle. Think about the emotional toll this took on Roman parents. You would likely experience the profound grief of losing multiple children. A mother might give birth to 5 or 6 children, only for half of them to never reach school age. This constant shadow of death surely shaped parental attachment. While affection undoubtedly existed, it might have been tempered by a pragmatic, almost defensive emotional distance, a learned mechanism to cope with inevitable loss. It's a stark contrast to our modern expectations of childhood, where every infant is cherished and expected to thrive. Then comes the truly disturbing practice we touched upon earlier: infanticide through exposure. After birth, the infant would be placed on the ground before the paterfamilias. His decision to lift the child, a gesture called tollere filium, was the sole act of acceptance. If he did not pick up the child or explicitly commanded it, the infant would be exposed. This meant leaving the baby outside, often in a public place, to die from exposure to the elements. Starvation or animal attack. It was not considered murder under Roman law, it was the legal right of the father. Why would a father do this? There were several reasons, none of them comforting. The most common was likely gender preference, particularly against female infants. Sons were highly valued for continuing the family name gens, inheriting property, and participating in public life. Daughters, while important for forging alliances through marriage, were often seen as a financial burden, requiring dowries and offering less direct contribution to the family's public standing. If a family already had several daughters or limited resources, a newborn girl might be deemed superfluous. Another reason was deformity or illness. If an infant was born with a visible physical disability or appeared sickly, the paterfamilias might decide it was not viable or would be a drain on family resources. The idea was to prevent a prolonged life of suffering for the child and a burden for the family. This pragmatic, almost utilitarian, approach to nascent life is chilling to our modern sensibilities, which prioritize the inherent value of every human life from birth. Economic hardship also played a role. A poor family, unable to feed another mouth, might reluctantly resort to exposure as a desperate measure. It's a grim reminder of the stark realities of survival in a world without social safety nets. While exposure was a legal right, it wasn't always a simple, cold decision. Accounts suggest that some infants might be left in specific spots where they might be found and adopted by others, perhaps by childless couples or, more cynically, by individuals who would raise them for future servitude or prostitution. This rescue was not always benevolent. Historians still debate the frequency of infanticide through exposure across different social classes, with some arguing it was more common among the poor, while others point to evidence that even wealthier families practiced it for reasons of gender or deformity. Imagine the mother's agony in such a scenario. Her emotional bond with her child would be immediate, yet her legal power was non-existent. She could plead. She could weep. But ultimately, the paterfamilias' word was law. Her grief would be private, unspoken, perhaps buried deep beneath the demands of daily life. The legal and social acceptance of infanticide is one of the most disturbing aspects of Roman family life. It stands in stark contrast to the Roman emphasis on civic duty and the strength of the family unit. It underscores the profound difference in value placed on human life in the ancient world compared to modern ethics. A Roman child's very right to exist was conditional, subject to the absolute power of its father. It makes you deeply appreciate the safety and security that modern societal norms afford to every newborn. A far cry from the precarious start faced by Roman children, you've explored the chilling realities of a Roman child's precarious beginnings, including the father's absolute power and the practice of exposure. Now, let's turn to another cornerstone of Roman family life that, while seemingly universal, operated under vastly different and often unsettling principles: arranged marriages, unequal unions. For Romans, marriage was rarely about romantic love. It was a pragmatic, often ruthless tool for forging alliances, consolidating wealth, and perpetuating social status. Imagine you are a Roman daughter, perhaps as young as 12 years old, or a son barely into your teens. You have little to no say in who you will marry. Your parents, particularly your paterfamilias, have been carefully considering potential spouses for years, weighing factors that have nothing to do with your personal feelings. Is the prospective spouse from a family of good standing? Will the union bring political advantage? Perhaps a valuable voting bloc in the Senate? Will there be a substantial dowry? Or will your family gain access to desirable properties or influential connections? These were the paramount concerns. The concept of love, or amor, as a prerequisite for marriage, was largely foreign to the Roman elite. Affection might, and hopefully would, grow after marriage, but it was certainly not the foundation upon which unions were built. This meant that you could be and often were married off to someone you barely knew, perhaps someone significantly older, or someone whose temperament was entirely unsuited to your own. Imagine being a young woman, suddenly plucked from your childhood home and thrust into a new household, legally under the control of a man who was essentially a stranger, all for the sake of your family's social climbing. The dowry dues was a critical component of every Roman marriage. This was a sum of money or property contributed by the bride's family to the groom's. It was meant to help support the wife during the marriage and, theoretically, provide for her if the marriage ended in divorce. However, the dowry often represented a substantial investment for the bride's family, a financial burden that could influence who a daughter was married to, and sometimes even lead to the exposure of female infants if the family couldn't afford a suitable dowry for multiple daughters. For the groom's family, a large dowry was a sign of prestige and a welcome financial boost. The dowry was not simply a gift, it often represented the bride's legal connection to her birth family's wealth, but its control often shifted to her husband or his paterfamilias. There were two main forms of marriage in Rome, and both reveal the unequal nature of these unions. The older form was marriage cum manu, with hand. In this type of marriage, the wife legally passed from the potestas of her own paterfamilias to the manus hand of her husband, or, if he was still alive, to the potestas of her husband's paterfamilias. This meant she became legally akin to a daughter to her husband, losing all legal ties to her birth family. All her property became her husband's, and she inherited from him, not her own parents. Imagine the complete loss of identity and legal autonomy. You are literally transferred from one male authority to another, a piece of property in a legal transaction. However, over time, a more common form emerged, especially among the elite, known as marriage sine manu, without hand. In this form, the wife remained legally under the potestas of her own paterfamilias. Even after marriage, she technically retained ties to her birth family and inherited from them. While this might seem to offer more independence, in practice she still resided in her husband's home and was expected to manage his household. Her legal autonomy was still largely theoretical, as her husband, or his paterfamilias, still wielded significant practical authority over her daily life. This form was often favored by wealthy families as it prevented the dowry from becoming irrevocably part of the husband's estate, making it easier to reclaim in case of divorce. Scholars continue to debate the true extent of female autonomy gained by sine manu marriage, with some arguing it was a significant step towards independence, while others emphasize the continued societal and practical limitations. For the young Roman man, arranged marriage also stripped away personal choice, while he might have more influence than his sister. Ultimately, his father's decision was supreme. He was expected to marry a woman who would bear legitimate children to continue the family line and enhance his social standing, not necessarily a woman he loved. This created a tension between public duty and private desire, a tension often explored in Roman poetry and literature. Consider the expectations placed upon the Roman wife. Her primary duty was to produce legitimate children, especially sons, to ensure the continuation of the family name. She was also expected to manage the household with efficiency and discretion, overseeing the enslaved staff, educating her young children, and maintaining the family's reputation. While some elite women might receive an education in literature or music, their public role was minimal. Their power was exercised largely within the domestic sphere, through their influence over their children and sometimes, subtly, over their husbands. It was a life of prescribed roles, with little room for personal ambition or expression beyond the confines of the home. The concept of adultery further highlights the unequal nature of these unions. For a Roman wife, adultery was a severe offense, punishable by exile or even death, bringing immense shame upon her family. For a Roman husband, however, relations with enslaved women or prostitutes were generally tolerated and not considered adultery, provided he didn't infringe upon the honor of another Roman citizen's wife. This glaring double standard perfectly encapsulates the gender inequality embedded within Roman family structures. So, As you observe the carefully orchestrated unions within Roman society, remember that behind the celebratory wedding feasts and the exchange of dowries lay a stark reality. Roman marriages were contracts, not celebrations of individual affection. They were unequal unions designed to serve the interests of the Paterfamilias and the broader family, prioritizing lineage, wealth, and power over the personal happiness or choice of the individuals involved. It makes you deeply appreciate the very modern luxury of choosing your own partner, doesn't it? You've now seen how Roman marriages were less about romance and more about strategy, and how children faced a perilous start. These dynamics flow directly into another unsettling aspect of Roman family life: women's limited legal locus. Despite the idealized image of the Roman matron, her legal and social rights, even within her own home, were severely restricted, placing her in a perpetual state of dependence. Imagine you are a Roman woman, whether a young bride or a seasoned matron. Your life, from birth to death, is largely defined by the men in your family. While Roman society admired virtues like pudicitia chastity, frugalitas thriftiness, and gravitas dignity in women, these virtues were often cultivated within a framework of profound legal subordination. You were rarely, if ever, a legal entity unto yourself. Let's first revisit the concept of patria potestas. As a daughter, you remained legally under the absolute power of your paterfamilias for your entire life, unless you married cum manu. This meant you could not own property in your own right, enter into contracts, or even initiate legal proceedings without your father's consent. Any property you inherited or acquired was legally considered part of his estate. Even as an adult woman, perhaps with children of your own, you were still, in the eyes of the law, a minor under his guardianship. If you married cum manu, you simply transitioned from your father's potestas to your husband's manus. In this form of marriage, you effectively became a legal daughter to your husband. All your property, including your dowry, became his. You no longer inherited from your birth family, but from your husband. This was a complete legal absorption into his family, stripping you of any independent legal identity you might have had. Imagine the psychological weight of this transition. One day, you are legally bound to your father. The next, to a new master, your husband. The later, more prevalent form of marriage, sine manu, seemingly offered more freedom. In this marriage, you remained legally under your father's potestas while living with your husband. This meant you retained legal ties to your birth family and could inherit from them. You could also theoretically own property separate from your husband. However, this legal independence was often more theoretical than practical. Societal norms and the immense power of the paterfamilias, whether your father or your husband's, meant that real autonomy was still rare. You were still expected to obey your husband and manage his household. Any property you controlled might still be managed by your father or a male guardian tutor. Scholars vigorously debate the true extent of independence Roman women gained through sine manu marriages, with some arguing it opened doors for female economic activity, while others maintain that social strictures largely negated legal gains. Consider the public sphere. Roman women, even elite ones, were largely excluded from public life. You could not vote, hold public office, serve in the military, or pursue many professions. Your influence was meant to be exercised primarily within the home, through your role as a mother and wife. While some influential women might exert indirect political power through their husbands or sons, direct participation was forbidden. You were expected to be seen, but not heard, in the public arena. This stark contrast with the vibrant public life of Roman men highlights the fundamental inequality. Even within the home, your authority was secondary to that of the paterfamilias. While you might manage the daily operations of the household and supervise the enslaved staff, ultimate decisions rested with your husband or his father. Your role was to implement his will, to ensure the smooth running of his domestic domain. This meant that while you held significant responsibilities, your power was delegated, not inherent. The pervasive Roman legal concept of guardianship tutela further illustrates women's limited legal standing. Except for a brief period in later Roman law, all Roman women, regardless of age or marital status, were legally required to have a male guardian. This tutor had to approve any major financial or legal transaction you wished to undertake, such as selling property, making a will, or manumitting an enslaved person. This system, ostensibly designed to protect women, effectively robbed them of full legal agency, reinforcing their perpetual status as legal minors. Imagine wanting to make an important decision about your own inheritance or property, only to require the explicit approval of a male relative who might not even have your best interests at heart. Perhaps one of the most glaring examples of this inequality was in matters of adultery. As we touched upon, for a Roman wife, adultery was a severe crime, bringing immense shame to her family and potentially resulting in dire punishments, including exile or even death, at the discretion of her paterfamilias or husband. For a Roman man, however, sexual relations with enslaved women, prostitutes, or even unmarried foreign women were not considered adultery, provided they didn't dishonor another Roman citizen's wife. This blatant double standard underscored the gendered nature of Roman morality and justice, where a woman's chastity was paramount for maintaining lineage and family honor, while a man's sexual conduct was largely unregulated outside the realm of other male citizens' wives. Despite these severe limitations, Roman women were not entirely powerless. Within their domestic sphere, they often wielded considerable practical authority. They managed complex households, supervised large numbers of enslaved people, educated their young children, and maintained social connections. Through their sons, they could exert indirect influence on public life. The idealized image of the Roman matron, while legally constrained, still commanded a certain respect within her defined role. Yet, this respect was always contingent on her adherence to societal expectations and her legal subordination. So, as you observe the daily life within a Roman home, remember that, for the women, life was a delicate balance of responsibility and restriction. They were integral to the functioning of the family and society, yet they existed within a legal framework that profoundly limited their autonomy and defined their lives by their relationship to men. It's a stark reminder that even in a highly developed civilization, gender inequality was deeply entrenched, leaving women with a surprisingly limited legal locus within their own families and beyond. It makes you profoundly grateful for the legal freedoms you enjoy today, doesn't it? You've delved into the formidable power of the Paterfamilias and the limited legal standing of Roman women. Now we must confront another deeply unsettling and omnipresent aspect of Roman family life: slavery's shadow in the home. The Roman household, far from being a private sanctuary, was often a micro-society defined by the institution of slavery, where human beings were treated as property, their lives entirely subject to the will of their owners. Imagine stepping into the bustling Roman domus house of a reasonably well-off family. You hear the clatter of pots from the kitchen, the murmur of voices from the atrium, the rustle of robes in the tablinum. But look closer. That woman diligently preparing the morning meal. She is enslaved, the man carrying water to the bath. He is enslaved, the tutor patiently instructing the children in Greek. He, too, is enslaved. Slavery was not an external institution, something confined to distant mines or vast agricultural estates. It was woven into the very fabric of daily domestic life, a constant, undeniable presence in almost every Roman household of means. The sheer number of enslaved individuals in Roman homes was staggering. A wealthy senator might own hundreds, perhaps even thousands of enslaved people across his various properties. Even a middle-class family would likely have at least a few to assist with daily chores. This meant that the intimate spaces of the home were shared with individuals who had no rights, no legal standing, and whose lives were entirely at the whim of their master, the paterfamilias. The nature of their work varied immensely. Some enslaved individuals performed arduous manual labor carrying water, grinding grain, cleaning, and cooking. Others, particularly those captured from educated societies like Greece, might serve as highly skilled craftsmen, accountants, secretaries, teachers, or even physicians. You might see an enslaved hairdresser meticulously styling a matron's hair, or an enslaved librarian organizing scrolls. This vast range of skills meant that enslaved people were indispensable to the functioning of the Roman household, from the most menial tasks to the most intellectual. But regardless of their skills or the relative kindness of their owners, they were fundamentally property. Under Roman law, an enslaved person had no legal identity. They could not marry; their unions were contubernia, not legal marriages, could not own property, and could not testify in court against their master. They could be bought, sold, leased, or inherited just like any other piece of chattel. Imagine the psychological toll of knowing your entire existence, your very humanity, could be traded away at any moment. The power of the Paterfamilias over his enslaved individuals was almost absolute. He had the right of dominica potestas, the power of an owner. He could inflict any punishment, from flogging to torture, and could even legally kill an enslaved person without consequence, particularly in earlier periods. While later laws introduced some protections against extreme cruelty, these were often difficult to enforce and depended heavily on the moral compass of the owner. You might witness a casual act of violence, a quick slap, or a harsh word, dished out with impunity by the master or even the mistress of the house. This constant threat of arbitrary punishment hung heavy in the air, a terrifying undercurrent to daily life. Sexual exploitation was another grim reality. Enslaved women, and sometimes men, were vulnerable to sexual abuse from their owners, sons, or even male guests. This was rarely, if ever, seen as a crime under Roman law, as enslaved individuals had no legal right to consent or refuse. Children born to enslaved mothers were automatically enslaved themselves, perpetuating the cycle. This exploitation was a dark, pervasive aspect of the domestic environment, highlighting the profound moral failings of the institution. Historians still debate the frequency and exact nature of sexual violence against enslaved individuals in Roman households. Though its legal permissibility is well documented, the relationships within the household were incredibly complex. While some owners might treat their enslaved individuals with a degree of paternalism or even affection, teaching them skills or eventually granting them freedom. Manumission. This was always at the owner's discretion. Loyalty and obedience were enforced through a combination of fear, reward, and the crushing weight of their legal status. Enslaved individuals might develop genuine bonds with their master's children or with fellow enslaved people. But these bonds were always fragile, subject to disruption by sale, punishment, or death. For you, observing this Roman household, the presence of enslaved individuals creates a deeply disturbing paradox. It's a society that celebrates freedom, law, and civic duty, yet built its very foundation on the systematic denial of freedom and human rights to a vast segment of its population. The opulence and leisure enjoyed by Roman citizens were often directly facilitated by the uncompensated labor and suffering of enslaved people. Even the rituals and daily life within the home were touched by slavery. Enslaved individuals might participate in household religious rites, but as silent observers or facilitators, not as full members. They shared the same living spaces, ate similar though usually lesser quality food, and witnessed the private lives of their owners, yet remained perpetually outside the core family unit, constantly reminded of their status as chattel. So, as the sounds of the Roman domus envelop you, remember the silent, ubiquitous presence of slavery. The convenience, the luxury, the very fabric of Roman family life was often built upon the legal and physical subjugation of human beings. It's a sobering reminder that beneath the grandeur of Roman civilization lay a system of profound inequality and disturbing human exploitation, casting a long, inescapable shadow over the intimacy of the Roman home. You've now confronted the deeply ingrained reality of slavery within the Roman home. This profound imbalance of power extended even to the dissolution of marriages, revealing another disturbing facet: divorce and dispossession. Unlike many societies where marriage was a lifelong, unbreakable bond, Roman divorce was surprisingly easy, but its consequences, particularly for women and children, could be harsh and profoundly unequal. Imagine a Roman couple, perhaps after years of marriage. Perhaps the political alliance that once made their union advantageous has soured. Maybe the wife has failed to produce male heirs, or the husband desires a more advantageous match. In Republican Rome, and even more so during the Empire, divorce was remarkably accessible. It wasn't a complex legal battle requiring fault or extensive grounds. Often, all that was needed was a simple declaration of intent, either written or verbal by either the husband or, increasingly, the wife. There was no public shaming or religious condemnation that often accompanied divorce in other ancient cultures. In fact, it became quite common, especially among the elite, to divorce and remarry multiple times to further political or financial ambitions. However, the ease of divorce masked a deep-seated inequality, particularly for the woman. While a woman could initiate a divorce, especially in a sine manu marriage, where she remained legally tied to her father, her position was often far more precarious than her husband's. Her primary vulnerability lay with the dowry. Remember the dowry, that sum of money or property her family contributed at the marriage. It was meant to support her during the marriage and in the event of divorce. However, the dowry was traditionally managed by the husband. Upon divorce, the dowry was supposed to be returned to the wife or her paterfamilias, but reclaiming it could be a protracted, difficult process. A reluctant or unscrupulous husband might delay payment, challenge the amount, or claim he was entitled to keep a portion for expenses incurred during the marriage. Imagine being a Roman woman, suddenly cast out of your home, and then having to fight a legal battle for the very financial security that was meant to protect you. This made women highly dependent on the good faith of their husbands and the legal acumen of their male guardians. Furthermore, if the wife was found to be at fault for the divorce, for instance, if she committed adultery, she could lose her dowry entirely or a significant portion of it. As we discussed, the definition of adultery was profoundly unequal, punishing women far more severely than men for similar transgressions. This placed an immense burden of moral perfection on the wife, where a single misstep could lead to financial ruin and social disgrace. The threat of losing her dowry was a powerful tool to control a wife's behavior, ensuring her strict adherence to Roman moral codes. And what about the children? This is where divorce became truly disturbing for the younger generation. Roman law was clear: children born of a legal marriage always remained under the patria potestas of their biological father. This meant that upon divorce, the children almost invariably stayed with the father, even if they were infants. The mother, regardless of her maternal bond, had no legal right to custody or even regular access. Imagine being a Roman mother, forced to leave your children behind, knowing you might rarely see them again, as they were legally considered the property of their father. This separation, which seems incredibly cruel to our modern sensibilities, was the accepted legal norm. This practice effectively turned children into pawns in familial disputes and alliances. They were assets for continuing the family line, for securing inheritances, and for forging new political connections. Their emotional well-being was secondary to these broader family interests. A child might witness their parents' separation, then be raised by a stepmother, with little to no ongoing contact with their biological mother. This could lead to deep emotional scars, resentment, and a profound sense of instability for the children involved. Historians still debate the emotional impact of such separations on Roman children, and whether informal contact with mothers was more common than formal legal rights might suggest. The ease of divorce also meant a degree of instability within the family unit. While the Paterfamilias remained the constant, the composition of the nuclear family could change frequently. Children might grow up with multiple stepmothers and half-siblings, creating complex internal dynamics. For the stepmothers, their role was often challenging, trying to gain the affection and loyalty of children who were legally bound to their biological father. For men, divorce was generally a much simpler affair with fewer repercussions. They retained their children, their property, and could quickly remarry to pursue new ambitions. While social disapproval might exist for excessive divorces, it rarely carried the same stigma or financial devastation as it did for women. So, as you witness the casual nature of a Roman divorce, remember the profound human cost beneath the surface. It was a system that, while offering flexibility for the powerful, often left women dispossessed and vulnerable, and children treated as legal property, severed from their mothers. It's a stark reminder that even in seemingly sophisticated societies, progress in one area like legal flexibility can mask deeply disturbing inequalities in another like family rights. It makes you truly appreciate the concept of shared custody and equitable divorce settlements in our modern legal systems, doesn't it? You've observed the harsh realities of divorce and the potential dispossession it brought. Now, let's explore another facet of Roman family life that often operated on principles far removed from modern sentiment adoption. Not always for love. While we tend to view adoption as an act of nurturing and providing a home for a child in need, in ancient Rome, it was often a pragmatic, strategic, and even ruthless tool for securing lineage, wealth, and political power. Imagine a powerful Roman senator, perhaps aging, with no surviving biological sons. For a Roman man of influence, the continuation of his family name gens was paramount. It wasn't just about personal legacy, it was about preserving his political faction, his property, and the ancestral rights of his household gods. In such a scenario, adopting an orphaned child out of compassion was certainly possible, but far more often, the act of adoption was a calculated move to secure an heir. The most common form of adoption, known as adrogatio, for an adult male who was sui juris, meaning legally independent, or adoptio for someone under patria potestas, formally transferred an individual from one paterfamilias' authority to another's. The adopted individual ceased to be part of their birth family and legally became a full member of their adoptive family, taking on the adoptive father's name and inheriting his property. This was a complete legal rebirth, severing all prior familial ties in the eyes of the law. The key point here is that the adopted individual was often an adult, or at least a young man old enough to be useful. Think of famous examples. Julius Caesar adopted his great-nephew Octavian, who would become the Emperor Augustus. This wasn't an act of childhood rescue, it was a deliberate political maneuver to ensure a successor to Caesar's immense power and legacy. Octavian, already a young man, was transformed overnight into Caesar's legal son, inheriting his name, his clients, and ultimately his place in Roman history. This wasn't about providing a loving home. It was about ensuring dynastic continuity. Another scenario involved younger men from less powerful families who might agree to be adopted into a wealthier or more prestigious household. For them, it was an opportunity to escape the confines of their birth family's modest circumstances and gain access to greater wealth, political connections, and opportunities for advancement. It was a career move, a pragmatic exchange of lineage for opportunity. Imagine being a bright, ambitious young man, and your father agreeing to give you away to a powerful senator who needed an heir. It's a transaction of human potential, not purely a bond of affection. The purpose of adoption was explicitly to create an heir and preserve the family line. If a paterfamilias had no sons, or if his sons had died, adoption was the primary legal mechanism to prevent his family name and property from dying out. This was a profound social and religious obligation. Without an heir, the family's ancestral cult, honoring the deceased ancestors, would cease, which was considered a grave misfortune. This practical motivation meant that affection, while it might develop, was not a prerequisite. The adopted son was expected to fulfill the duties of a biological son, to be obedient, to manage the family's affairs, and eventually, to provide grandchildren. If he failed in these duties, he could potentially be disinherited, just like a biological son. Scholars often discuss the emotional outcomes of such adopted relationships. with some arguing that genuine affection frequently developed, while others emphasize the underlying transactional nature that could lead to resentment or disillusionment. Consider the darker side: manipulation and control. A powerful paterfamilias might adopt a promising young man, effectively bringing him under his absolute potestas, gaining control over his resources and political career. This could be a benevolent mentorship, but it could also be a strategic move to absorb talent or influence into one's own sphere, potentially at the expense of the adopted individual's independence. It's like a corporate takeover, but with human beings as the assets. For the birth family, giving up a child for adoption, especially an adult son, was also a calculated decision. While it meant losing a member of their own lineage, it could also create powerful alliances with the adoptive family or relieve a financial burden. It was a complex negotiation between families, prioritizing collective gain over individual emotional ties. The practice of adoption also highlights the Roman legal system's emphasis on legal fiction. Despite the biological reality, an adopted son was legally treated as if he were a biological son, giving him all the rights and responsibilities of that status. This pragmatic approach to family law allowed the Roman system to adapt to the realities of inheritance, lineage, and political succession. So, as you delve into the intricacies of Roman adoption, remember that beneath the legal formalities lay a profound practicality. It wasn't primarily a charitable act to provide a child with a home. It was a sophisticated legal tool used by the powerful to ensure their legacy, their wealth, and their political influence endured. It was adoption, certainly, but not always as we understand it today, a stark reminder that even the bonds of family could be forged and broken for reasons far removed from love. You've witnessed the strategic nature of adoption and the intricate web of patria potestas. Now, let's explore another unsettling dynamic within the Roman family: the elderly's fading authority. While the paterfamilias held absolute power, his dominion wasn't eternal. As he aged, and his adult sons achieved their own prominence, the nature of his authority could subtly and sometimes brutally shift, revealing a less romanticized picture of filial piety. Imagine a powerful Roman paterfamilias in his later years. He might be a respected elder, perhaps a former consul or a celebrated general. For decades, his word has been law. His adult sons, now perhaps senators or military commanders in their own right, still technically remain under his potestas. All their property, all their earnings, legally belong to him. This creates a fascinating tension. A son might wield immense public power, commanding legions or governing provinces, yet remain legally a minor in his father's household. This arrangement, while legally straightforward, could lead to considerable friction. A successful adult son, perhaps in his 40s or 50s, might chafe under the continued financial and legal dependence on an elderly father. Imagine winning a major military campaign, bringing back immense spoils, only for all of it to legally become your father's property, to be dispensed at his discretion. While many fathers would undoubtedly be generous, the legal reality of absolute control could be a source of deep resentment. The most profound shift in authority, of course, came with the death of the paterfamilias. Only upon his passing did his adult sons become sui juris, legally independent and heads of their own households, patres familias. For some, this was a moment of profound grief. For others, a long-awaited liberation. It was only then that they could truly own property, make independent wills, and fully control their own destinies. This meant that sons might subtly, or not so subtly, wish for their father's demise, a dark undercurrent to familial relations. Historians still debate the emotional reality of these power transitions, with some arguing that genuine affection often outweighed the legal desire for independence, while others point to evidence of intense filial rivalry. Consider the plight of an aging paterfamilias who had grown frail or mentally infirm. While his legal power remained, his practical ability to exercise it might diminish. His adult sons, eager to gain control of the family's assets and political influence, might subtly undermine his authority, or even, in extreme cases, declare him incompetent and seek legal guardianship over him. This could lead to bitter family disputes, with siblings vying for control and manipulating an elderly parent. It's a tragic reversal of roles, where the once all-powerful patriarch finds himself vulnerable and reliant on those he once commanded. Roman law, while granting the paterfamilias immense authority, also provided some avenues for sons to gain a degree of independence while their father was still alive. For instance, a son's military earnings, peculium castrens, or later certain gains from public service, could sometimes be held as his own, free from his father's direct control. These were crucial exceptions that allowed ambitious young men to build their own fortunes and status, even while remaining technically subordinate. However, these were limited exceptions, not a general dismantling of patria potestas. The transition of power also involved the inheritance. Upon the paterfamilias' death, his property would be divided among his legitimate children, sons, and unmarried daughters. This was often another flashpoint for familial conflict. Disputes over inheritances were common in Roman society, with siblings accusing each other of manipulation, disloyalty, or influencing the father's final will. The legal system, while providing frameworks for inheritance, often found itself arbitrating bitter family feuds fueled by greed and lingering resentments. Even the paterfamilias' control over his adult daughters could weaken. While they remained under his potestas in sine manu marriages, their daily lives were spent in their husbands' homes. As the father aged, his practical influence over their marital affairs might wane, though his legal authority theoretically remained. Their autonomy, such as it was, might increase as their male guardians became less diligent or more accommodating. The Roman emphasis on pietas, duty and devotion to family, gods, and state, was certainly a powerful ideal. Sons were expected to honor their fathers, both living and dead. However, the legal realities of patria potestas often created a tension between this ideal and the pragmatic desire for independence and control. A son might publicly display profound pietas while privately resenting his continued subordination. It was a complex, often hypocritical, dynamic. Consider the occasional dark rumors in elite families, an elderly patriarch suffering a sudden, convenient illness that allowed his impatient sons to inherit. While not legally sanctioned, such suspicions certainly lingered, highlighting the intense pressures and desires for control within powerful Roman households. It's a bit like a corporate succession battle, but with literal life and death stakes, and centuries of family legacy hanging in the balance. So, as you observe the aging Roman patriarch, remember that his absolute power, while formidable, was ultimately finite. His authority, once unquestioned, could fray at the edges as he aged, and his ambitious sons matured. The transition of power, often awaited with a mix of grief and anticipation, reveals a darker, more pragmatic side to Roman filial piety, where the bonds of family were constantly tested by the relentless pursuit of individual freedom, wealth, and influence. It's a sobering reminder that even absolute power could not defy the ultimate equalizer time. You've witnessed the slow erosion of the elderly patriarch's power. This subtle shift in authority often became overtly brutal when we examine the dark side of dynasties, the ruthless ambition, manipulation, and outright cruelty that could tear powerful Roman families apart. Beneath the veneer of unity and civic duty, the pursuit of power, wealth, and status often led to fratricide, parricide, and a chilling disregard for familial bonds. Imagine a powerful Roman family, one of the great gentes like the Cornelii, the Fabii, or the Julii. Their names resonated with centuries of glory, public office, and vast wealth. But within these very families, the competition for supremacy could be as fierce and deadly as any battle on the frontier. The stakes were immense control of vast estates, lucrative political appointments, military commands, and the very destiny of Rome itself. One of the most insidious forms of manipulation was political marriage. While we've discussed arranged marriages and powerful dynastic families, these unions were less about creating a stable home and more about forging temporary alliances. Daughters were given as pawns, married off to strengthen a political faction, only to be divorced and remarried when a more advantageous alliance presented itself. Sons were pushed into unions with women from powerful families. Regardless of personal compatibility, the emotional cost of such transactional relationships was immense, often leading to resentment, infidelity, and instability within the marriage. Consider the ruthless pursuit of inheritance. As a paterfamilias aged, his sons might become increasingly impatient for his death, as only then could they become legally independent and inherit their vast fortunes. While overt parricide killing one's father was an abhorrent crime, the historical accounts are rife with whispers and accusations of sons subtly hastening their father's demise or manipulating their wills. A sudden, convenient illness for a wealthy, ailing patriarch could easily be suspected, even if rarely proven. The stakes were simply too high to always trust in natural causes. While literary sources often exaggerate for dramatic effect, the sheer volume of such accusations in Roman history suggests a genuine underlying societal anxiety about filial ambition and greed. Fratricide, the killing of a brother, was also a grim reality within powerful Roman families. When multiple sons survived and vied for the same political offices, military commands, or control of family assets, sibling rivalry could escalate into deadly conflict. The stories of the Gracchi brothers, both tribunes who met violent ends due to political feuds, exemplify this tragic reality. While their deaths were public, the underlying familial competition often fueled such brutal rivalries. Imagine the intense pressure within such a family, where your own brother could be your greatest rival, or even your assassin, in the relentless climb for power. Then there was the chilling practice of proscription lists during periods of civil war. Leaders like Sulla, the second triumvirate Antony, Octavian, and Lepidus, and others would publish lists of political enemies to be executed, their property confiscated. These lists often included relatives, uncles, cousins, even brothers-in-law whose wealth or political connections were deemed a threat. Familial ties offered no sanctuary in these brutal power struggles. In fact, being related to a prominent figure could be a death sentence. Imagine hiding in fear from your own relatives, knowing they might deliver you to your death for political gain. The very concept of a dynasty in Rome was fraught with peril. Unlike hereditary monarchies where succession was clear, Roman political power was often contested. This meant that ambitious family members might resort to conspiracy, assassination, or outright civil war to secure control. The Julio-Claudian dynasty, for all its splendor, was riddled with accusations of poisoning, murder, and exile among its members. Livia, Augustus's wife, was often rumored to have poisoned her stepsons to secure the succession for her own son. Tiberius. While difficult to prove, these persistent rumors illustrate the dark undercurrents of ambition that permeated the imperial family. Sexual scandals and accusations were also weaponized within dynastic struggles. Accusations of adultery, incest, or other moral failings were frequently leveled against rivals, true or not, to destroy their reputation and undermine their political standing. Family secrets became public weapons, tearing apart the very fabric of respect and trust. The Roman emphasis on dignitas dignity, prestige, and gloria glory could fuel this ruthless ambition. Every action, every alliance, every marriage was calculated to enhance the family's standing. If a family member was perceived as a weakness, a liability, or a rival, they could be ruthlessly sidelined, exiled, or even eliminated. It was a constant, high-stakes game of political survival, played out within the intimate yet dangerous confines of the family unit. It's a sobering thought that the very bonds of kinship, which should offer comfort and security, could become a source of profound danger in ancient Rome. The glittering facade of grand Roman families often concealed a chilling reality of manipulation, betrayal, and violence, all in the relentless pursuit of power. So, the next time you hear about a famous Roman family, remember that behind their celebrated names and glorious achievements often lay a dark history of ambition that tore their own dynasties apart, revealing a truly disturbing side of Roman family life. It makes your own family squabbles feel like a tea party, doesn't it? You've witnessed the brutal ambition and internal strife that could shatter even the most powerful Roman dynasties. As we conclude our exploration of the disturbing side of Roman family life, let's reflect on a legacy of control how Roman family structures, for all their celebrated strength and emphasis on pietas, were fundamentally built upon deep-seated power imbalances, leaving a complex and often unsettling inheritance. Imagine yourself looking back at the Roman family from the vantage point of history. The Romans prided themselves on the strength and stability of their family unit, the familia, viewing it as the bedrock of their society and the Roman state itself. They extolled virtues like discipline, duty, and respect for elders. Yet beneath these ideals lay a pervasive system of control that, by modern standards, would be considered oppressive and deeply inequitable. The most prominent feature of this legacy, and perhaps the most disturbing, is the absolute power of the Paterfamilias, his patria potestas, the lifelong legal authority over his children regardless of age or achievement, and all members of his household, including enslaved individuals, created a hierarchical structure that was fundamentally about dominion. This wasn't merely social influence, it was a legally sanctioned right to life and death, a power that shaped every decision, every interaction, and every destiny within his domain. The Roman family, for all its lauded discipline, was fundamentally a benevolent, or sometimes malevolent, dictatorship. This legacy of control extended profoundly to women. Their limited legal locus, their perpetual requirement for male guardianship tutela, and their status as legal dependents ensured that their lives were largely defined by their relationships to men, father, husband, or guardian. Even the more liberal sine manu marriage, while offering some theoretical independence, did little to dismantle the deeply ingrained societal expectations that confined women primarily to the domestic sphere and denied them full legal agency. The Roman family, in this sense, reinforced a system of systemic gender inequality that limited women's public roles and personal autonomy. For children, the legacy of control began at birth with the father's decision to raise them or expose them to death. This chilling practice of infanticide highlights a fundamental difference in the value placed on nascent human life compared to modern ethics. For those who survived, childhood was often short and harsh, marked by high mortality rates. Even as adults, sons remained legally subordinate to their fathers, their property and their future careers often subject to the patriarch's will. This system, while ensuring dynastic continuity, often fostered resentment and a relentless pursuit of the father's death for legal and financial liberation. The integration of slavery into the very heart of the Roman home is another disturbing aspect of this legacy. Enslaved individuals, despite often forming close personal relationships with their owners, were legally chattel, their lives and bodies entirely subject to their master's arbitrary power. This constant presence of human subjugation within the intimate space of the family normalized extreme power imbalances and underscored the fundamental lack of human rights for a vast segment of the Roman population. It's a stark reminder that the comforts of many Roman households were built upon profound human exploitation. Finally, the ease of divorce and the Roman laws of custody reveal a legacy where children were often seen as legal assets, inextricably linked to the father's lineage, rather than as individuals with emotional needs for both parents. The mother's legal disinheritance from her children upon divorce, and her struggle to reclaim her dowry, underscore the profound economic and emotional vulnerabilities inherent in the Roman family structure, particularly for women. While the Roman family provided continuity for the state, scholars still actively debate the long-term psychological impact of these rigid structures and rapid marital changes on the emotional development of Roman children. In conclusion, while the Roman family unit was undeniably strong and vital for the cohesion of their society, Its strength was often derived from a coercive system of control. The Paterfamilias' absolute authority, the legal subjugation of women and children, and the pervasive shadow of slavery created a domestic environment that was often far from the idealized picture we sometimes imagine. It was a legacy built on power imbalances, pragmatic calculations, and a disturbing disregard for individual rights and personal autonomy. It makes you realize just how far our understanding of family, equality, and human rights has evolved over the millennia, and how truly disturbing the intimate realities of Roman family life could be. All right, as the last echoes of our journey through the disturbing side of Roman family life fade into the quiet of the night, it's time to gently bring our minds back to the present. You've walked through their atria, observed their chilling laws, and seen the human cost of absolute power. It's a powerful reminder that history, in its quietest corners, often reveals the most unsettling truths about human nature and societal structures. Let the images of omnipotent power, calculated marriages, and controlled fates gently fade away, giving way to the quiet peace that surrounds you. The sense of ancient homes and the air of a distant world fade away, giving way to the familiar comfort of your own space. Let any lingering thoughts of harsh rules and unequal relationships gently drift away, replaced by a sense of relaxation and peaceful reflection. The struggles and dependencies of people in the past are now, temporarily, part of your understanding, enriching your sense of history and the complexities of family life through the ages. As your breathing deepens and your body relaxes, know that the stories of the past are always here, waiting patiently to be rediscovered whenever you seek a gentle escape into the depths of time. But now, the journey is complete. Rest easy, knowing that another story has been revealed. Gently, just for you.